I'm not as humorous as you guys. I'm a bit dry, and I started life the son of an agricultural scientist who was sent by the government to Griffith to work in the CSIRO research station to grow grains and food to provide the troops in the Second World War. So I was born to my father, and he was on a big farm, Farm 462, down at Griffith, and so I've started from early days. But I'll start my talk talking about, first of all, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, God said, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth." And in verse 11, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind." So God created the earth with the soil and all the minerals that were in it, both minerals to grow food, but also minerals that man could discover and start to mine coal and iron ore, and then to burn coal in the smelting furnaces to produce steel, and then to start making buildings, steel buildings rather than earth and clay and brick, and then to build trains and, oh, the sound's come up now. Yeah, and then to build planes and trucks and planes and things that we can transport people around. But it was also to improve our life. Now, our wonderful God gave some the skills for this, and that's in Exodus chapter 35, which I'd like to read to you, because if you haven't read the Old Testament, it's amazing, because to learn about farming, you really need to read the Old Testament. There's not much in the New Testament about it, really, although Paul sort of alludes to it. And in chapter 35, it says, verse 30, "And Moses said unto the children of Israel, See, the Lord hath called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he hath filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, and in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship, to devise curious works." Then in verse 35, "Them hath he filled with wisdom of heart, to work all manner of work, and of the cunning workman." Now, the Lord has put it into my father's mind, and my father talked to me very early on that he was a seeker of the truth, and that if you ask the Lord to tell you how to grow crops in the ground that you're in, he will give you the ideas, and they do come to you. And I'd like to quote from Daniel chapter 4, verse 25, where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream about a great big tree and then cut it down, but the tree had grown to heaven and fed the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. But then, and I'd bought a farm in 2002 in the middle of the drought in South Queensland, and my property and all the properties around me were brown, and I had a small property comparatively, 440 acres, but and I prayed to the Lord and said, not like this, but while I was doing things, please show me how I can grow food. And Daniel chapter 4, verse 25, Daniel says to King Nebuchadnezzar that because he's haughty, God will make him become a beast and live in the field, and a beast's heart will be given to him, and the dew of heaven. And that was the epiphany moment for me. And so Matt talks about not having enough water to grow things. I learnt on my property, I had 250 acres of cultivation. It's hard to irrigate that, and nobody around me irrigated.
I'm just going to fix this.
Nobody around me irrigated, but everybody around me was practicing no-till, whereas I realised that the dew of heaven fell during the night, and then it landed on the stubble, and in the morning the sun came up and dried the stubble out. So the moisture from the dew of heaven never got into the ground. But on my properties, I started to plough the paddocks, and I had tandem offset discs, fire harrows, and then truck tyre rollers, and I would go up and down 4 times or 6 times till my soil was like sand, whereas all my neighbours had very cloddy soil, which dried out rapidly. But sand doesn't, well, sand dries out, but when it's flat, then the moisture loss is minimal. Now, I studied medicine when I was a teenager and graduated, and then and bought a farm, but it was only a little farm, 15 acres. Then I bought another farm, 40 acres. Now, there are all sorts of stories about those farms, but probably not much point talking about it. But on the 440 acres, all my life from when I was 7 months of age, I would only sleep 3.5 hours a night. Now, I've done that all my life, and I'm now almost 78, Mick. Almost 78. And I still lie on my tummy and sleep. And in 3.5 hours rather, I can absorb all the oxygen I need to provide every cell of my body with oxygen. That's why we sleep, for 2 reasons: to put oxygen back into our bodies, and for our liver to clean our blood so that we're clear in the mind when you wake up. So if you wake up in the morning and you're foggy and cloudy in your mind, your liver's not doing its job. So Matt talked about not growing with poisons, and the worst thing to do is to grow with poisons. Now, all the gardening gurus tell you that you should use chemical fertilisers, but the problem with those is they're toxic, and then when you use those, the insects really come in, the fruit fly. Now, on my farm, I put in an orchard, and a very important thing with soil is to do a pH of the soil. Now, this is a pH meter that I dropped and broke, but it looks like that. It's a Brunnings. Bunnings will sell them, but you can buy it from Brunnings directly. And all you have to do is squeeze up some moist soil and stick the probe into there, and it'll show you what your pH is. Now, a better way is to get a soil analysis done so that you know all the different minerals that are in there and what the pH is, the calcium level, the cation exchange capacity. They're all very important if you're going to grow crops. It's okay in your backyard. Things will grow probably if you stick them in the ground and put water on them and get the sunlight. So Matt's garden showed sun for a lot of the time, but it's very important when you're growing to not have trees producing shade, because plants won't grow very well without sunlight, and it's best for them to get full sun. Now, I had a patient once when in May one year, he lived in Gatton, and he had gone west to a century down a mine, 550 air kilometres west of Alice Springs. Now, that's pretty arid, and they're only doing mining there. But the plants, even in arid soil, it was 68 degrees Celsius, and they cooked eggs and sausages in a pan on the ground at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in May one year. So imagine the heat. The plants don't mind that amount of heat. You know, we don't like it, but so it's very important when you plant that sunlight's important. If you're going to grow crops, you've really got to either cut down the trees or move the trees or prune them severely, and you've got to work out where you can grow things. Now, I was talking to Matt before, and the best place in the churchyard is up against Springwood Road there, where there's a slope and there's no shade, and it's a thought. You can grow vegetables here. And if people come by and they want to reach over and pick some of it, they're likely to fall over and land on their head, you know, so, and you can have some tracks there for them at the same time. Thanks, Vince. Ask Vince about those later on. Now, so if you were to ask the Lord how to grow whatever on your property, and in the 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6 drought in South Queensland, I was the only farm growing crops. Now I was growing forage sorghum and forage oats in forage sorghum in summer and forage oats in winter, and it was only because I was working in my surgery from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Then I'd drive to my property, eat nothing at night or eat a salad raw, and then sleep for 3.5 hours, then get up, usually by 10 p.m, 9:30, and all my neighbours on the properties around me and their horse studs, they were watching TV, and they usually turned their TV off at 10:30. But I was farming, and I had my tractor with incredible lights on it, front and back. And they used to say, they'd meet me at clearing sales and say, "You're the crazy guy who farms all night." And I said, "Yeah, no, it's not me." And I told a lie. I told them that I had a 22-year-old lady who was my farm manager, and she did all the farming for me, and she liked doing it at night time because nobody would believe me that I worked in the surgery in the day and then did farming all night, but that was true. Now the 22-year-old lady, they would come by, they'd come by on Saturdays and Sundays, driving very slowly, looking out for the 22-year-old chick who was working on my property. But that was just a big fat black lie, because I had a program where you need to do crop rotations on a farm. Otherwise your farm is fallow. And when your farm's fallow, it dries out, you lose nutrients, you lose nitrogen actually. And nitrogen is what grows in the plants. Now, if you look at the handout, the second page is a sort of a leaf. It's a plant from the Australian Soil Fertility Manual, and it shows you that the plants absorb moisture on the right-hand side of the roots, and then the nutrients on the left side, and they absorb nitrogen from the air and carbon dioxide with photosynthesis to make sugars and then convert them to energy, and then what is produced in the leaf goes back into the roots and supplies the roots. Now, today's the 24th of August, and probably none of you, this is a little diary, it's tiny. Now, in it, the good thing about it is that it told me that on the 4th of August, it was a new moon. So there was no moon in the sky. And the 20th of August, Tuesday the 20th of August, was a full moon. Now, when you've got a garden growing, I had problems with weeds. Now, Matt's got so much greenery on his property, the weeds don't get a chance. But when you've got any bare soil, the weeds will grow like a 6-legged beetle. And I just noticed 3 days ago, just after the full moon, that all the new weeds, plants are all coming up, and they're only about 20 mil across the 2 leaf stage, but they're a serious problem. So when I go home, and on Monday I'll be out there pulling out the weeds and dislodging them so that they can't grow. But it's best to cover the ground with mulch of either straw or hay or something like that, or shredded material from your gardens. Now, and then it'll stop the weeds from growing. Now, you won't notice your plants because your plants are more mature, and you don't notice whether they're putting new growth unless, like, I've got lots of citrus in my garden, and I've only got a small garden in my front yard, which I use because it's got a high fence. My garden is 6 metres north to south and 15 metres east to west. And in there, I better read it from my diary to tell you. I planted, I've got 3 brown turkey figs, 2 emperor mandarins, 2 lemons, 2 black muscat grapes, 4 limes, 3 oranges, 2 white mulberries. Now, one mulberry is called a Shahtoot mulberry, and the Shahtoot mulberry, spelled S-H-A-H-T-O-O-T, is from India. And there's a guy called Sir Fruiter who in 753 AD discovered that the Indians who lived north of the Ganges River were dying at about 50 years of age. And the Indians who lived south of the Ganges River, in the poor part of India, where the temperatures go, 40, 45, 50, they were living to 80 years of age. Now, they ate different diet, but it didn't matter. The people north were eating sweets and all those silly things that, see, Proverbs says, what's sweet in the mouth is? Bitter in your stomach, exactly. And there's nothing more bitter to you older people like my age and less, that when you eat sugar, your rheumatism gets worse and your diabetes gets worse. Now, I was in practice for 47 years, and for the first 8 years, I had the prescription book like all the other doctors. But I got sick of people not getting better from high blood pressure. And I started thinking about what the factors were in high blood pressure. So I started giving my patients vitamin B6, 200 milligram in the morning. And then I found that if they had it morning and midday, they could often control their mild to moderate high blood pressure with B6, pyridoxine. So that's a thought for you people. I take it still myself because I'm trying to do lots of things. Now, when I retired, no, I've never retired. People say, are you still practicing? Yes, I practice, but I don't use a prescription book, so I don't need to be registered. So I quit my registration when I was 70, so for the last 7 years, I still visit people, mainly in Melbourne, because I had a Greek community down there of about 20,000 people who used to come to me when I was in practice, and they started coming in about 2008 through to 2017 when I stopped practice. And so they either come up to visit me about every month or two, or they invite me to go down and stay in their luxury resort guest house in their properties twice a year. And it's always to suit what their garden's doing, or what their children are doing, And I say, look, George, that doesn't suit me. What about that? No, I can't. You've got to come in October this, Okay, that's all right. I can vary it a bit. But, yeah, okay, I better get on with these. 4 lime trees, 3 oranges, 2 white mulberries. Now, Sir Fruiter, I forgot, that's where I tracked off. Sir Fruiter began telling his Indian people in the north, and what they were dying from was cancers of the abdominal organs mainly, but also cancer of the lung. They weren't smoking, but there were other things relating to it. And the main thing is that if your pancreas suffers, so when you eat sweets, the bigger thing is that your pancreas suffers. Now, pancreas cancer, when I first started studying medicine, well, years ago, was 8th in the line of cancers. Now it's 3rd. So the most prominent cancer is breast cancer. The second is, for a while, colon cancer slipped to about 5th, but it's now back up to 2nd. And pancreas is 3rd. Now, if you get a diagnosis of colon cancer, with the conventional treatment, you might survive 2 years or 3 years. But with cancer of the pancreas, the average survival from diagnosis is 4 to 5 months. Now the reason is the pancreas sits at the level of your navel, at the back, right across the back wall of your abdomen, behind your peritoneum. And the pancreas is very hard to diagnose. But I learned very early on, I went back to anatomy and physiology and remembered that if I run my finger down people's spines, so even now when people say, look, I've got this problem, you know, and I say, do you mind if I run my finger down your spine? So I do it with my left hand because I'm ambidextrous, but there are some things that are best done with my left hand. So I'll start off at the base of the neck, and the most prominent vertebra in the base of your neck is C7, which is the thyroid vertebra. And so you'd go down, and I'd put my hand across the front of their chest, high up there, so that ladies didn't think I had any funny ulterior motives. And I could feel them when they winced, when I put pressure on a vertebra that was tender. And the pancreas is T7, the 7th thoracic vertebra, supplies the 7th with the visceral nerve. And Safruta found that when he got the Indians to eat one leaf, a mulberry leaf that big of the Shatut mulberry, one leaf a day, it reactivated the beta-lactamase cells in their pancreas. Now, he didn't know it was the beta-lactamase cells, but he just knew that people's pancreas reactivated, and when they had diabetes or cancers, any sorts of cancers, they got better. And those people then lived till they were 80 odd, like the people in the south. But of course, they had to stop eating sugar and all the other things. Now sugar just doesn't come in sugar cane. It comes in beets, beetroot, rich in sugar. My horses and cattle loved carrots because they're rich in sugar. So the roots like carrots, beetroot, mangolds. Now mangolds were what Germany used to extract sugar before the war. So from 1900 or even earlier, but up until the Second World War. Now in the Second World War, what happened is when the bombs from Germany landed in Great Britain, when they did postmortems on people who'd been blown up in a mine, they found that they had no coronary artery disease, no sign of hardening of the arteries. But when they introduced sugar from Cuba, which they introduced to America first, from Cuba to America, and they refined sugar, instead of it coming from the vegetation, the vegetables, it came from sugarcane. And by the time of the Korean War, 1950, 1951, the 18-year-old American soldiers who died in the Korean War, when they examined them in a post-mortem, they found they had advanced coronary artery disease. Does that tell you a story? What's sweet in the mouth is bitter. How bitter is advanced coronary artery disease at 18 or 19 years of age? I never eat sugar. I have a younger brother, I won't tell you which one. He has no hair. He's got a tiny little bit of hair around here. When he was about 12, 13, 14, 15, he'd have a cup of tea and he'd put 8 teaspoons of sugar in there. 8 teaspoons of sugar. You know, now, if I have coffee or tea or anything like that with sugar in it, I can't do it. I put it away. So I've got so used to not having sugar in anything, you know. Now, Matt put out watermelon, or the ladies put out watermelon. Watermelon is a very good fruit. But the white is better than the pink. And the skin is even better than that, because the skin's rich in silica and calcium fluoride. The white is rich in potash. Now, if I had people, I used to have lots of people in my practice, they would come and they would present a whole lot of symptoms. Now, from when I was graduated, or when I was in medical school, I'd sit right down the front here, at that door actually, on that chair, and the professors would come in and they'd start talking and they'd ask the students, they'd say, now does everyone understand that? And then they got used to me, and they'd come over and they'd say, "Richard, do you understand that?" And I'd say, "No." And they'd say, "Come to my office when it suits you and we'll talk about that," you know. So I got to know the professors quite well, and people said, "Aren't you worried they'll think you're silly?" And I said, "No, I want to graduate and I want to understand the basics as why things happen in your body." Like, see, Matt, in his garden, he understands the basics about the garden. That's why his garden flourishes, see? The farmers around me, they didn't learn from what I was doing, because I did it at night time and they couldn't see what I was doing. That's one of the reasons why I did it at night time. But when you only sleep 3.5 hours a night, you know, I'd be wandering the streets through the night, so the police would lock me up, see? So I bought a farm. White mulberry leaf per day. Now, the only place in Brisbane that might have them is Ross Evans Nursery at Morningside. Now, they're a very good nursery, and I was going to say that if you're going to produce garden beds in your backyard or your front yard, you need to dig up the grass and throw it away. No, turn it upside down and let it mulch. Let it die, and then it'll produce good stuff. But you need to do a pH, and you need to do a soil analysis with your soil. And you then, before you grow your beds, you've got to think about what you're going to grow. And there's no point growing Jerusalem artichokes if your family doesn't like them. So you've got to grow what your family want to eat, and then research that, and then there are a number of factors that are important. Sunlight, I mentioned before. The type of soil you've got's important, and then you do a pH and you get an idea of whether your soil is acid or neutral or alkaline. And the ideal soil to grow food is pH 6 to 7. Now, if you want to get all the trace minerals, you really need to have the pH from 6.3 to 6.7. And this pH meter takes a lot of guesswork out. It's really good. Now, the most important thing in growing anything is really to enrich your soil with compost. Now, if you don't know how to make compost, yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, but I haven't got a photo about compost. When you grow compost, like if you go home and you say, righto, let's start growing some food. So you've got to decide what you're going to grow, but you've got to really, number one, you've got to enrich your soil. So you make a compost heap by having, say, timber slats or corrugated irons very easily, and then just put in 12 mil plain steel rods and just hammer it in on each side of the iron to keep it up vertically, and make the heap about 1.2 metres by 1.2 metres by 1.2. And what you do with to compost in the heap, you could put straw, or you put branches from a tree that you've pruned off because it's putting too much shade on your ground, and you can put the branches there to let air come in under, because when you make compost, you've got to get air and moisture in amongst the vegetable scraps that you produce when you're preparing food to eat. And so then you put layers down. So the first layer you'd put down would be some sort of greenery over the top of the branches, and then make it fairly thick. And generally, if you make layers that are about 50 mil deep, it just works better. So then you put greenery down first. Then you put your vegetable scraps. Now, vegetable scraps are likely to attract rats and mice, and you mightn't have them here, but where I live in Toowoomba, my neighbours specialise in certain types of rats. Now, rats are usually grey, but their rats are black. They're different, you know, and you don't want them. They're very ferocious. but they love to eat the vegetable scraps. So if you get a whole lot of vegetable scraps and leave them in a bin inside your house, and when you've got a decent number of them, then you come out and spread it all out on the 4 feet, 2 inches deep or maybe less, and then you cover it with soil. Now, your own soil's good, and you can start digging out where you're going to put a bed. Now, when you do your beds, you should really do a 4-year rotation if you want to grow without using chemicals and without using pesticides. Now, remember I talked about Daniel chapter 4, verse 25? Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, the dew of heaven will fall on your coat. And the dew I found on my farm, and I was at Southbrook between Pittsworth and Cambodia, and I had 2 trays that I'd taken from my father's farm when he'd sold one particular farm, and it was 1 yard, or just slightly less than a metre. So a metre square with a 1/2-inch lip on each side, 12 mil, and 1 corner cut off. And I put on a perfectly level surface, and I put it out away from my house and away from the trees around my house, and I put it there, and I noticed over a period of about 6 months, from about September through to March, that on the bed, on the 2 steel plates, I got 2 to 3 millimetres depth of dew. 2 to 3 millimetres. Now that doesn't sound much. It's, it's small. But then I tipped it into a container and measured it. Now I noticed that 20 nights a month, basically, the dew of heaven falls every night. And it falls because of condensation of moist air, and then the water condenses out. We won't go into the physics of that. Are any of you interested in physics? We could talk about it later. David Williamson, he might talk about it with me, but maybe not too many. But anyway, so on 20 nights a month, there was no wind. And on the other 10 nights, there'd be wind blowing, and the wind would dry out the moisture that would have fallen on the plates. Now, I'd go to clearing sales and farmers would say, you're the crazy guy who farms all night. And I'd say, no, it's not me. It's my 22-year-old female farm manager. I shouldn't have said that because now I've lost my train of thought. I have too many things. People say, have you retired? No, I'll never retire. I'd like to live till I'm 120. Moses lived to 120. And so he spent 40 years in Egypt, the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Then he spent 40 years in the Sinai desert, doing who knows what, with, what's his name, the Midianite priest? Jethro, yeah. And then God called him to go and deliver the children of Israel. And so he spent 40 years in the desert with them, dragging them out of Egypt and taking them to Jordan, Now, so that means that Mick, Augustus, you and I are still middle-aged, see? Because 0 to 40 is youth, 40 to 80 is middle age, and 80 to 120 is old age. But don't think old age is bad, because when it says that when God took Moses up into the mountain, he said, and Moses' vision was not dimmed. He didn't wear glasses, see? He didn't have glasses then, but he didn't have glasses. His vision wasn't dimmed, and his strength was not abated. Now, how many people 80 to 120 do you see who fit that category? Very few. And if you sit in the nursing home, you're not going to get there. But if you're farming like I do, and 21 hours a day, 20 and a half hours a day, yep, my mind's constantly going. I ask the Lord to show me things. See, in Exodus 30 to 35, I read to you, that God put into the minds of a certain guy, Balzaleel, or whatever his name was, how to do cunning work, making clothing for the priests to wear, and then also to do metals and all that sort of work. Now, God gave me cunning work to do on my farm. I learned in that drought, and I love drought, I must tell you. Matt says that he's worried about the not enough rain, and I don't worry about it because I know that the dew of heaven falls every night. It still is falling every night. And in the drought, I had the dew of heaven for those 4 or 5 years. And the farmers would say, "Are you the crazy guy?" Yeah, I said no. But they would say, "Gee, have you had any rain lately?" No, we had no rain. And they would say, if I could get 40 to 50 mils of rain, I would plant such and such. What they didn't realise, they weren't listening to the Lord. Let me go over to Deuteronomy just quickly. Now, if you've never read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, your life's very poor, I can tell you. Let me tell you about Deuteronomy 28. "And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God." And then verse 3 to 14, it goes on with the blessings. And you would want every one of them if you're a farmer. If you're living in town in the nursing home, you won't care about blessings because they provided to you, you know, the people. But if you're relying on the Lord, when you're a farmer, you really need to. Now, I had a lot of Italian farmers around Stanthorpe, and they were getting hail on their stone fruits and their grapes. And they would say, "Oh, Dr. Wagner, would you like to come down to my property at Toowoomba and look at the hail nets that I've just put in, you know, to stop the hail damage on my property?" And I told Angelo Jacosa, I said, "No, I can't come for 3 weeks, you know, I'll come down after that." When I went down 3 weeks later, guess what? God had sent hail and destroyed their hail nets. And there was a bloke at Maryland, east of Toowoomba, he had the most incredible hail nets. Oh, over all his trees, you know. God destroyed them too, you know, and he lost a couple of $1 million worth of hail nets. Now, you see, you go down to verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Now from verse 16 to verse 68 is a whole list of curses. And one of them is, send hail on your crops. And as a doctor, in my practice, even though I had a farm, I thought, gee, when you're a farmer, you're really exposed to God's will. You either hearken to his voice and obey his voice, or you don't. And if you don't, the verses of blessings are wonderful. The verses of curses are what the farmers are getting today. And the globalists, yeah, they're added to the curse too, aren't they? Anyway, I think my time's, 5 minutes. So if I can leave with you, the important thing, Matt, Vince tells me I've got 5 minutes. So the most important thing really on a property or on your backyard is to grow compost. Now, you can't grow compost on 1,000 acres, or my neighbour on 2,500 acres. It doesn't cover it. But you can do it by putting in a fallow crop, like barley if you've got weeds, barley and lupins. And those two together in the winter are very good because barley really suppresses weed growth. So in your backyard, if you've got lots of weeds where you want to put your garden, where you've got lots of sunlight, barley and lupins are good to put in. You go to a seed nurse and say, I'd like such and such barley or lupins. And just plant a small amount. You can broadcast or you can do it in rows, and that will suppress weeds, but and it'll provide nourishment for your soil. lots of nitrogen and potassium and calcium, particularly from those crops. But in your backyard, compost is so important. Now I've got to talk later on, if you can bear to put up with me again for half an hour, is fruit from your trees. And when you grow fruit trees, and I'd recommend that if you've got your 4 garden beds like that, then facing north, and then on the south you should put like citrus trees, and then on the western side, against the east side of a western wall, you can put in deciduous, because the sun will come down there, and deciduous, you want the sun in winter, but you don't need the sun in summer. So in summer you'll get a bit of shading from 1 to 4 when the sun's fierce. And then you'll need less moisture to go into those ones that have got deciduous trees like apples, pears, stone fruits. Now, growing stone fruits in Queensland is crazy because of fruit fly. But you can get around that. I had a farm in Yamundi, 40 acres, I grew ginger. But it didn't grow all the time, so I put in an orchard. And the first year that I put the orchard, I hadn't enriched the soil much on about half of it. So on the other half, I enriched the soil, and then I put in trees there. And when I enriched the soil and put the trees in, the first year, the roots of the trees took up the nutrients in the soil, and without chemical fertilisers, and they bore fruit, and the fruit fly loved them, and the fruit fly loved the other bit too. But in the second year, the fruit fly would come to the fruit and would fly around it, and people come to my property and said, why did the fruit fly around the fruit? And I say, because the humus level, the organic matter in the soil is so great that it absorbs the natural sugars into the leaves and the fruits, and they don't like it. Fruit fly love plants that grow fruit that is not enriched with natural sugars. And so, you know, you shouldn't grow late maturing fruit, even mid. The trees on my property that grow fruit, I only put in early varieties because the fruit fly haven't come around. But also, once you've enriched the soil from the organic matter that is best in compost, then you won't need to use insecticides or sprays. I don't use them on my property. And so all the fruit I get is nutritious, you know. Yeah. If you want to know more stuff, ask Matt. Now, Matt said, if you want to talk about bees, yes, I've had bees. And one time I was robbing the hive of bees, and I had some dieseline on one of my trouser legs in a overall, and I got 200 stings around my waist. 200, just, you know. Bees do not like dieseline. They don't like dark colours, they like light colours. So this would attract the bees to me, see? So there are things about growing bees. So if Matt wants to have another talk about bees, I'd like to talk. I'd like to come to the talk if you invite me. But if you get too many critical, that's dreadful talk that Wagner did, I guess you won't invite me. Anyway, look, I've enjoyed talking to you. There's too much in my mind to talk. I've got to be a bit like you other guys who are, got to limit myself. We didn't go through all the photos, did we? No. Well, we can do that in the second talk because I'll talk less and...
No, we appreciate it. Thank you.